So thank you all so much for coming to my virtual town hall today. My plan is to just go over basically kind of an overview of what happened this session. I can talk about the bills that we passed, and I can talk about the ones that were most interesting to me and the ones that I was involved with most heavily. I could talk about the different bills that we worked on. Right now we're in the very end of the session. So it's, we finished up yesterday with like some final reading, which is the final round of debate for a whole bunch of bills. Today we're off on Saturday, Sunday we're off, and then Monday and Tuesday we're off too. So I'm in the middle of a really long weekend. So I'm home in my beautiful, comfortable home where I feel like I haven't even been here all year. And I pretty much spent all day cleaning and doing laundry. I slept in a little bit. I'm doing that thing we all do where like I'm figuring out what I have in my fridge that's going to expire because I need to use it. So yeah, it's just kind of a domestic day here for me. But I'm Megan Hunt, and I'm a state senator, and I represent District 8 in Midtown Omaha. And that includes the neighborhoods of Dundee and Benson and Keystone, pretty much Midtown Omaha, just north of Dodge. And I was elected in 2018, so I'm in my third year of service, and I'll be up for re-election in 2022. So we're just kind of starting to like talk about what it looks like to run for office right now after a year of pandemic, not even after, but still during, all the things that people have faced in our community over the last year, from unemployment to illness to losing loved ones to all the uncertainty of the year, to also the racialized violence and the racial violence that we've seen in the past year. And so, you know, it's kind of weird to think about running for office, and you know, I feel like I can't really do it the way it's always been done, like where you go knock the doors and have the town halls and act, you know, endlessly positive, like you're the ones who have the answer for everything, and you know, you're going to be the one to fix stuff. Because after the last year and after the last 3 years of being in the legislature, I've kind of realized that none of us in there are going to be able to fix the stuff. We did many things over the past year to try and fix the stuff. We tried to call for a special session to address COVID-19 and racial violence in Nebraska by doing some important criminal justice reforms that Nebraskans have been asking us to do. And then also like crisis standard of care, unemployment, housing and food assistance type issues, just kind of emergency COVID stuff that we thought we needed to do in the past year. And we could only get like, someone can fact check me on this, but I think we could only get like 11 or 12 senators to even support that out of 49. So it's hard to feel like you're making a dent sometimes, but at the same time, we had a lot of really great things happen this session too. I was talking to Senator Matt Hansen, who's my friend. He represents like a northeast part of Lincoln, I think. And we were talking the other night, and he said, it's not the worst session I've ever had, but it's definitely the least fun. And I agree with him on that. We had a very weird session. We have all of these new senators who got elected in 2020, but we haven't really socialized very much. It's been very weird and difficult to operate as usual in the wake of COVID. And we've lost a lot of opportunities for relationship building. Normally we would be, you know, going out pretty often after we adjourn. We'd be going to events, fundraisers. Like in the normal times, it seems like there was something every single night, every single morning that we could go to and build these relationships that are so important when we're working on compromises, when we're building goodwill, and you know, just getting along with each other. And that really didn't happen this last year. And so as a result, I feel like policy-wise, nothing really bad happened, but nothing really amazing and great happened. It was just kind of like a tenuous year where everybody was trying to like fight for their priorities and fight for their district's priorities, but not upset the apple cart too much, because we just didn't have that social interaction that we need in order to get along with each other and do some of the conflict resolution that we would normally do. You know, an effect of that is that some really good bills that probably should have passed, or bills that probably could have been reworked to some effect to find some compromise, they really fell short. And there were a couple bills and amendments. For example, Justin Wayne introduced an amendment that would allow Ernest Jackson, who is an innocent man who is incarcerated in Nebraska right now. But because of this like legal loophole, new evidence has come to light, but they aren't allowed to have a new trial to get him out of prison because of some legal problem. And so we introduced an amendment to solve that legal problem, and it failed by 1 vote. So that was incredible. And that's something that we're gonna keep working on and continue to work on. Senator Justin Wayne is the one leading the charge on that. So if you have questions about that, I encourage you to reach out to him. Another idea that just barely failed was extending the developmental disability waiver in Nebraska, which would allow children who are who deal with development disabilities to access additional funding, federal funding, to make modifications to their home or their car, or get special types of therapy, all of the things that children with disabilities need in order to, you know, reach their potential. So that failed by just a few votes. And Michaela Cavanaugh, Senator Cavanaugh, was the one leading the charge on that. And she continues to push on that. I spoke to her today about, you know, with only 2 or 3 days left of session, you know, what can we do to make sure that this gets adopted next year? And we've already started conversations about that. One of the most frustrating things about the work is that at the end of session, which we're at right now, stuff we didn't get done, we have to wait until January to introduce new legislation to try again. On one hand, that January comes up really fast. The year always kind of flies by during the interim when we're working on other things. On the other hand, it sounds like a long way away. So that's just 2 examples of things we didn't get done, but we did get very close. And I'm very optimistic about those issues in the future. What else kind of changed this year in terms of overall session themes? I would say that there continues to be a very toxic influence of the governor on the legislature. That may also be kind of an effect of us not socializing and being together as often as we would normally be. Because I think there are many senators who are listening to the governor a lot more than we're listening to each other. And that continues to be a problem. I also really miss Ernie Chambers. Senator Chambers was my friend over the last 3 years, and I learned a lot from him in terms of rules, procedure, and I developed a really close relationship with him that continues to be important to me. But without his experience in the legislature, I mean, he was there for 46 years, I feel like things fall through the cracks a little bit, or sometimes we move along a little bit too quickly, because he was always there to kind of slow things down, to tell us about the legislative history of certain issues. And, you know, people have strong feelings about Senator Chambers. You love him or you hate him, but he was a master of the rules, master of procedure, and a master of the history of the legislature, which is something that we're also really missing. I can also tell you about the budget that we had this year that we passed pretty easily, honestly. It's somewhat more positive than in recent years, I would say. We had some money to work with on the floor. Some people got what they wanted. There was more general funds that we were able to use for different bills and different projects. And a lot of times there is no money to be used at all. So some of the funds that I was excited about, we put $1 million to the Nebraskans for the Arts, so that Nebraskans for the Arts is going to be able to give $1 million in grants to communities that are working on their arts districts. And last year, in 2019, 2019 or 2020, we passed a bill that created arts districts in Nebraska. At the time, there were only 2 states in the entire country that didn't have any arts districts recognized, Nebraska and Montana. So now Nebraska is one of them. So that means that our neighborhoods of Benson that have all of the wonderful galleries, that's getting the new Benson Theater, they're going to be able to apply and be recognized as a designated Nebraska Arts District, and they're going to have access to that $1 million in grant funding. So that's very exciting to me. That's going to be great for our district. We also left $25 million on the floor for next year. The healthcare cash fund is completely funded, so things are looking pretty solid from a budget perspective. We all just disagree very fiercely over what our priorities should be and what we should do with that leftover funds. You know, I, for example, think that we need to use that for that developmental disability waiver to make sure that our kids with disabilities are able to get the care that they need in Nebraska. One thing that I fought very vociferously over the last year is the allocation of funding for a new prison in Nebraska. I think that we need to focus on what research tells us works, which is rehabilitation, programming, adequate staffing, and not just locking people up, not just building more beds and building more space to lock people up. We already are short of funding for staff. We already are short of funding for programming for the incarcerated people that we have. And we do have an overcrowding crisis in Nebraska, but I think the key to addressing that crisis is going to be getting people out of prison by investing in the programming they need, investing in that rehabilitation, and also just basic criminal justice reforms, you know, making sure that we're not creating the conditions in our society that leads people to commit crimes or, you know, leads to the conditions that we recognize, that we criminalize, basically. I mean, we have to stop criminalizing poverty. We have to stop criminalizing homelessness. We have to stop criminalizing drug use and addiction. So these are things that I continue to fight for. I was a no vote on the budget for that reason, because I disagreed with allocating funding for the prison. You know, someone has to stand up for that. And so that was a role that I took this year. Another overall conversation theme that we had in the body this year was about brain drain and talent attraction and retention in Nebraska. How do we keep people here? And that is a question that comes up on so many different bills because it relates to so many different issues. I mean, whether we're talking about, you know, our workforce, or we're talking about housing, or we're talking about our tax base, all of these things are affected, right, by just the population that we have. So a big goal of mine in the legislature has been getting more people to live in Nebraska, getting more people to be as excited about this state as I am. And that's really a policy question, because a lot of people who don't want to live in Nebraska, it's because of the, you know, political reputation that we have in this state, and that's a problem. So there's a clear dividing line between senators who think that we need to do things like alleviate property taxes, spur economic development, cut business taxes, cut corporate taxes, stuff like that. And then there's people who think that those things are really less of a draw for young people, and that we really need to enact policies that will bring us out of the dark ages culturally, like cannabis legalization, you know, medicinal and recreational. In addition to that, we also need to allow people who have drug convictions to clear or modify their records, because it makes no sense to incarcerate and punish people for something that's legal already in like 36 other states or something like that. You know, I also focus on LGBTQ protections, making sure that no matter who you are and who you love, you can have a job here, you can have a family here, you can go to school here, and that's still a problem for a lot of LGBTQ Nebraskans. Paid family and sick leave, the kinds of things that support families and mothers and children. And we keep coming up against this divide, and it's very difficult to get senators to see the other's perspective. I'm scrolling through my notes here. Let's see if we have any questions. Looks like this is all up and working, so that's a good thing. And if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat or you can comment on Facebook. And my assistant, Cassie, is keeping track of all those. I really have the best staff. I had an amazing intern this year named Maggie English, and then she actually went on to become an administrative assistant for Senator Matt Hansen. So she started in our office as a intern, and then she went on to get a full-time job at the Capitol, which is amazing because that's what we want, right? Like we want new talent and young people coming into the civic system and learning how things are done. So we've got Maggie, who is my intern, who's amazing. She's also a photographer and she's like super talented with that. She took really great pictures of my staff. And then there's Cassie, who is my administrative aide and communications director. And she puts all of these things together. She really takes the lead and just make sure it all goes smoothly. And I'm so proud of her and so lucky to work with her. And then there's Hannah. Hannah is my chief of staff and legislative assistant, legislative aide. And she kind of does the like real nuts and bolts of the policy. Like Hannah helps me draft my bills. She helps me draft my talking points. She basically helps me understand what is going on because, you know, I know a whole lot about 5 or 6 different issues and I'm like have huge expertise in that. And then there's like 5 million things that I know basically nothing about. And Hannah's the one that makes sure that I know what's going on. She is also helping me lead the way on this legislative resolution that I filed to examine what is going on with foster youth. So I don't know if any of you heard this story on NPR, but this is how I found out about it. So Nebraska and like 34 other states have hired this outside group to find foster youth and youth in care of the state who are eligible for Social Security payments. So maybe they get payments because of a disability or because they've lost a parent. And the state of Nebraska takes those checks, which under federal law are the property of the youth. You know, the kids are entitled to that money that they've earned through our system. And the state uses that money and applies it to the cost of their care. So what NPR found and the Marshall Project found is that these kids affected who have had their Social Security checks taken away by the state, they had no idea that they were even entitled to these checks. They had no idea that the state was taking them, and neither did their parents and guardians. So what I want to do is find out how much Nebraska has taken from these kids, how we can get them their money back, and what legislative fixes we need, if any, to prevent this from continuing to happen. Since I brought this legislative resolution, I talked about it on the floor a little bit during debate. I've been contacted by several social workers, several foster youth, former foster youth, who told me that, yes, this is absolutely happening and it's like basically normal and it's considered, you know, of course we're going to do this, we're going to take this money and apply it to the cost of their care. When really the state should be funding that and the Social Security income should be going to those kids. It's so hard in Nebraska to fund care for foster youth, for youth in our juvenile justice system, any of the kids in state care. It's so hard to expand funding and services for them. You know, I was just talking earlier about incarcerated people in Nebraska and the lack of staff, the lack of programming. Well, all of that goes for youth in care as well. It's the same budget problem. And if these kids were able to keep the Social Security checks that they're entitled to and they weren't taken from them by the state, they may be able to transition into, you know, adult life a little bit more easily if they have those funds. So with Hannah, that's something that, and Cassie and all of my staff, that's something that we're going to be working on really heavily and really sinking our teeth into over the interim. After we adjourn next week, sine die, after we're done with this session, I'm going to take a couple of weeks off. I'm going on a vacation. And after that, it's going to be just this foster youth investigation thing for pretty much the rest of the year. And then next year, we'll introduce some legislation to fix it. and I'm excited about that. So there's a couple questions. One is, will we be able to avoid the medical marijuana bill being shot down because of technicalities this time around? I know the signature requirement won't be an issue. I also know the signature requirement won't be an issue. Can you imagine, like, Senator Anna Wishart and Senator Adam Moorfeld, they went out over the whole entire state, mostly Anna. I'm going to give her most of the credit. Love you, Adam, but like, this was Anna's baby all year, and she deserves all the credit. They went out during a whole pandemic when everything was fully shut down, and they got enough signatures to get a medical marijuana petition on the ballot. Like, that took so much hustle. Can you imagine when everybody's vaxxed, like how many signatures they're going to get? So yes, I'm very excited about the medical marijuana petition. That's definitely going forward. Senator Wishart, this is her project, and so I'm going to get this like 90% right, because it's not my baby, it's hers. But in order to get around that technical problem that they had last time, where the Supreme Court of Nebraska ruled that the marijuana petition, cannabis petition, violated the single subject rule. This was debatable. Like, we put ballot initiatives on the ballot all the time that say all kinds of wild, confusing things. But basically the county attorney in Lancaster County and the governor and, you know, other stakeholders against cannabis legalization, they were able to block the ballot initiative from being put on the ballot last November, with help from the Secretary of State as well and the Attorney General. In order to not violate the single subject rule, Anna has drafted new language for the next petition that says something like, Nebraskans have the right to use cannabis for medicinal purposes. Something like that. It's just like one line, it's a very short sentence, and hopefully with it being so simple, nobody is going to be able to say that they're violating the single subject rule. I have something else to say about this. I love this. I think that we have to legalize medicinal cannabis. Like, I've often on the record said, like, I don't like cannabis, I don't like marijuana, I don't want it around me. But like, when I examine that view that I have, it's really because of, you know, cultural stigma and bias that I've learned and I've grown up with. And none of my views about cannabis have anything to do with like, if it's actually effective, if it's actually safe, if people should be able to use it. And so I've evolved in my position and been able to say, you know, when you think about pot, you think about like Cheech and Chong and like some room full of marijuana smoke and hippies and whatever. And that just shows like my conservative Nebraska upbringing, that that's what I associate it with. You know, obviously people can take it in pill form, they can take a tincture, they can take an oil. It's not like reefer madness, obviously. And so, yes, we have to pass medicinal cannabis in Nebraska. Children with seizures are relying on it. Veterans with PTSD are relying on it, and it's a treatment that needs to be available to everybody who needs it. And that's also consistent with my view that the government should not get in between a doctor and their patient. You know, if a patient needs a treatment, is facing an illness or a condition that they need treatment for, and a doctor or physician says, this is the best course of action, you know, it's not the place of 49 of us weird yahoos in the legislature to tell them that that's not right. So I feel very optimistic about this initiative. I think it's going to pass, and then Nebraska will finally be in 1996, you know. And I say that because we have to legalize medicinal cannabis, but we have to legalize recreational too. I mean, we are so backwards. It's going to be another one of those things where they pass it at the federal level before they pass it at the state level. And, you know, it'll be a federal law that ends up making it legal here. And in addition to passing recreational, we need to allow people who have convictions for cannabis and marijuana to clear or modify their records, because we can't have people staying in our carceral system, you know, while other people become entrepreneurs and are able to open cannabis and CBD and hemp, whatever dispensaries, while other people are rotting in prison for doing the same exact thing. This transitions to another issue that I've worked really hard on in Nebraska, which is allowing people who have prior drug convictions to apply for food stamps, for SNAP, food assistance. A lot of people don't realize that in Nebraska, we have a law that says if you have ever gotten a conviction for drug use, possession, or distribution, you are barred from life from applying for SNAP. So that means, for example, we heard a lot of examples of this over the past year with the pandemic of people who, got convicted for drug possession, use, or distribution in like the 90s, like 20, 30 years ago. And now during the pandemic, they're system involved for the first time. They've never had to apply for unemployment. They've never faced any kind of financial hardship like this. So they swallow their pride. They go on the website. They say, okay, I'm going to apply for food assistance. They actually have the dignity to do that, to do something for themselves. And then they hear back from Health and Human Services that they're ineligible because they had some weed possession charge from like 1998. Like, on what planet is that fair? We allow people with convictions for any other crime. Think of a crime, you name it. Those people, once they've paid their debt to society, they've served their time, they've gotten out, they're allowed to apply for food assistance and receive it if they're eligible, but not people who have drug convictions. To me, that's a policy rooted in racism. It's a policy rooted in deep classism, because we know that wealthy people who have drug convictions are never going to have this problem. So that's another issue that I'm focused on working on in the legislature. I introduced a bill to do that this year. I've introduced a bill to do that every single year, actually. I'm going on the website right now because off the top of my head, I actually don't know what the status of that bill is. This year, I think I introduced 19 bills, and I had intended to do fewer because of the pandemic, and I only wanted to introduce things that were like super vital. Okay, so great. Yeah, so my bill to allow people with drug convictions to receive food assistance is on general file. So that means that we'll take it up next year. When we go back into session in January, that'll come up for debate. It'll also be something that I could potentially prioritize, which means it would, be taken a little bit seriously by the rest of the body. That could be a great thing. All right, let me see what other questions we have. So one question is, how many Nebraska children are hurt by such backwards punitive legalities? Well, it's something that's hard to quantify, right? I can give you an idea of how many children in Nebraska are affected, for example, by the law I just talked about that says if you have a drug conviction, you can't get food assistance. I think when that law was passed, it was thought of as something that would be a deterrent to drug use. And there's also kind of an idea that, like, if you're a lawbreaker, you don't deserve anything good. You don't deserve any help. You get what you have coming to you. You'll often hear my colleagues say things like, well, if they wanted that, they shouldn't have broken the law. And, if someone made a mistake 30 years ago or something and they served their time, I don't think it's really just to keep punishing them, because we're not just punishing them, right? We're punishing their families. And that also trickles down and has effects throughout the entire community that they live in, because it affects what kind of house they can live in, what their living situation is, what kind of job they can have, if they can get transportation to work and to school. These decisions that the state punishes people for, it's not that it's innately evil or criminal. It's a decision by the state to continue punishing these people. And that does trickle down to their children. So in Nebraska, we know that there are about 800 people a year who are denied SNAP benefits because of a prior drug conviction. So we know that that number is actually larger, right? Because if there's 800 people a year who actually take the time to go through the process of applying for food assistance and are denied. We know the number is actually much bigger because more people apply than, or more people are eligible than actually apply. And then all of those people have children, and all of those people have, you know, sometimes siblings that they take care of. And so I don't know how many children this affects, but I think we can safely say thousands. And that's something that we don't quite have quantified. Another question is, what's going on with LR 107 since the hearing a week or two ago? Okay, I can give you a little background on this. LR 107, I don't know, I don't want to talk over people's heads. Like, I want to put a question or something in the chat if you don't know what I'm talking about, because I don't want this to be like confusing. So senators can introduce bills, which are LBs, legislative bills, or they can introduce resolutions, which are LRs, legislative resolutions. And this year, Senator Groney introduced a legislative resolution, and he had it co-signed by 30 other senators, a bipartisan group. That I'm just going to look it up and like tell you about it. If you go to nebraskalegislature.gov, you can also look it up yourself. On the upper right part of the page, there's like a search current bills thing. You can search LR 107. So what this legislative resolution did is it kind of suggested that the Biden administration is taking away people's liberties, that they're in violation of the Constitution, that they are infringing on the rights of the states to do voter suppression, basically by clearing voter rolls, passing voter ID bills, stuff like that. There's one section, section 4, where it says, "We further protest against federal government actions which seek to punish traditional religious beliefs about the sanctity of life and sexual mores." It talks about things like land use and Second Amendment rights, First Amendment rights. It's cuckoo. And it is the kind of stuff that makes Nebraska a laughingstock, honestly. It makes us look out of our minds in this state. And so I knew that if that legislative resolution came to the floor, if it was voted out of committee, that it would pass because it had 31 supporters signed on to it. So I thought we needed to keep that in committee and not let it pass, or not let it come up for debate, because I hate it. And because of the subject matter in that legislative resolution, it should have been referred to the government committee. I sit on the government committee along with, let's see who's on there, Senator Halloran, Senator Lowe, Senator Brewer is the chairman, Senator Rita Sanders, Senator John McCollister, Senator Matt Hansen, and Senator Carol Blood, and me. So honestly, in the government committee, I don't think that they would have had the votes to get that out of committee. It would have been held in, because McCollister would have voted against it, and Matt Hansen, Carol Blood, and I would have voted against it. So it would have stayed in. Instead, the referencing committee, which is the executive committee, they went around that process, and instead of referencing it to government where it belonged, they referenced it to the executive committee, which has a very conservative majority, basically guaranteeing that the legislative resolution would be voted out. So this is some of the like behind the scenes shenanigans that's like not technically wrong or against the rules. It's just like really bad form. It's really bad governance to have a bill or a resolution that deals with subject matter that is the domain of a committee, and then to reroute that bill or resolution around that committee in order to guarantee its passage. It's like a little bit of committee shopping. It's not great practice. You know, what if we did that for gun bills? What if we did that for abortion bills? What if we did that for immigration or tax bills? It sets a really bad precedent when we are sending things to the wrong committee because we want a certain outcome. So in response, what I did is I introduced like a whole bunch of different legislative resolutions of my own. And I took up a whole bunch of time on the floor talking about them and reading about them and talking more about why I didn't like the original resolution LR 107. And I introduced resolutions around recognizing climate change, thanking the people who responded to the COVID-19 pandemic using science and evidence, thanking public health workers and departments and essential workers and stuff like that. I introduced a resolution condemning the January 6th insurrection at the US Capitol. I couldn't believe that we were going to talk about a resolution saying like that Joe Biden is doing unconstitutional stuff when like nobody has talked about what happened on January 6th. And that was a very interesting hearing. So basically my message to the executive board was, okay, if you want to pass these silly partisan resolutions that are not serious, that are a joke, then we can take up all your time with different resolutions. Then we can have a hearing every day over lunch that you have to sit through with all of my testifiers that I brought in here to talk about climate change, to talk about reproductive justice, to talk about healthcare, to talk about the Capitol insurrection, whatever it is I feel like. And, you know, food assistance, minimum wage, all that. And I think that I wore them out a little bit and we took so much time on it that they didn't end up scheduling it. So I think and I hope that LR 107 is dead. And that's just a tactic you have to use. Like sometimes it takes some persistence and you have to be a little bit of a pill, a little bit of a turkey, and you make people see that it's just not worth it. It's just not worth the time. Let me look at any of these other questions. Someone is asking, as someone who is a formerly incarcerated citizen, what can be done to increase staffing levels? The 10 grand hiring bonus has been very ineffective. And also, will you get involved in Doug Kobernick's inmate panel to help improve NCDS? So this is something, Nebraskans, friends, that is honestly not in my wheelhouse. Like, I have strong opinions about incarceration. I have strong opinions about our justice system. I'm not an attorney. I'm also not an experienced advocate in this area. And so what I do on this stuff is I tend to follow the lead of people I know and respect who have been working in this area for a long time. So for example, former Senator Danielle Conrad, who's now the executive director at the ACLU, she is someone who I ask her for guidance pretty often with this stuff. People at different local nonprofits, Black and Pink, they've been offering a lot of important guidance on this issue. And Senator Steve Lathrop, who's the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, this is an issue that he also takes very seriously. And although he's more moderate than I am, he shares the goal of finding a solution for both our staffing shortage, our overcrowding crisis, and the treatment of inmates, of people who are incarcerated. So this isn't something that I lead on. I'm not likely to be on that panel because I'm not the best person to be on that panel. My services are better, my skills are better applied elsewhere, but it is something that I'll be very involved with and that I will watch closely. And when the opportunity comes on the floor to debate a bill around this, that's when my skills are useful. That's when I will help lead the charge on that. Let's see, I want to tell you about my priority bill, which passed this year. I haven't even said that yet. So every year we get to pick a priority bill, which is like kind of our favorite, most important bill for the year. And this year I chose LB 260, which is a bill that allows people who have to leave employment in order to care for a sick loved one, a family member, to apply for unemployment. So the bill has a couple stipulations. It says that the applicant has to have done everything possible to try to retain their employment. So that means they have to have met with their boss and said, hey boss, my wife is in stage 4 cancer and we can't afford a home health aide and I need to leave work to care for her because she requires care. Or, hey boss, my child has a debilitating disability and I need to take off the next 2 months to stay home with her and help her with her rehabilitation, whatever reason. It could be anything. But the applicant has to have talked to their boss to try to make an arrangement for something else. So they have to say, like, can I take a cut in pay? Can I take fewer hours? Can I take different hours? And if the applicant has exhausted every option with their employer and they have to quit because of the needs of their loved one at home who's sick, then that's considered now in Nebraska good cause for leaving a job. There are like a dozen other reasons that Nebraska sees as good cause for leaving a job, including things like leaving a job where you're experiencing abuse, or if you're a veteran and you are relocating to attend school. Like there's like a dozen different reasons that the legislature has said, if you quit your job for this reason, we think that's a good reason and you should be able to apply for unemployment. It's not saying that you're guaranteed to get it. It's saying that you should be allowed to apply. So this is a bill that Senator Sue Crawford worked on for many, many years. She was term limited last year. And I took up the mantle this year with the help of my legislative aide, Hannah Murdoch, who was Sue Crawford's legislative aide. And I prioritized this year and we got it done. And I'm very proud because we passed it clean. And what that means is we passed the version that I introduced. A lot of times a bill will come out of committee with an amendment, or different amendments and things will get stuck on it during floor debate, during the 3 rounds of debate that we have. Didn't happen in my bill. We got it out clean. Somebody tried to put an amendment on it to say, we're going to cap the amount of unemployment that people can claim at like $700,000 a year or something. Total, not like per person, but like total in Nebraska. And there was an amendment to say, let's put a sunset on this. So like in 2 years, the law goes away. And that amendment was defeated. So the bill passed clean. If the governor signs it, which he hasn't yet, that will be the law of the land of Nebraska. So I'm very proud of that. I think, especially after this last year that we've had with COVID, it's just more obvious than ever that if you have to leave work because your wife has cancer, your kid has a situation, your mother, whatever it is, that you should be able to do that. Another thing about that bill is, another thing that makes it like not even that progressive is in Nebraska, you have to be searching for work in order to be eligible for unemployment. You have to show that you've like applied for a certain amount of jobs every week. And I've collected unemployment before, so I know what it's like to, have to show and certify that like you have been searching for jobs. And a lot of the opposition in the legislature was coming from people where it's like, okay, you've obviously never been unemployed. Like you've obviously never had to apply for unemployment. It's the same thing with any type of benefit, whether it's aid to dependent children or TANF or SNAP or unemployment. A lot of the opponents to this stuff are clearly not coming from a place of experience, because people would say on this bill, like, oh, well, people will just be on their couch eating their bonbons and collecting unemployment. But unless you've actually gone through this, that's not how it works. It's actually pretty difficult to qualify for unemployment. It's pretty difficult to navigate the bureaucracy that we have in Nebraska to qualify week after week and keep that qualification up by applying for jobs, being ready and able to work. So conservatives should feel comfortable with this bill, and I hope that it helps a lot of people in the future. What else? I also passed a bill this year. It passed in a landlord-tenant package that was hung on a John Kavanaugh bill. And what my bill does is it harmonizes the Landlord-Tenant Act with the Mobile Home Landlord-Tenant Act. A lot of people in Nebraska don't realize that like there's different laws for people who rent houses and apartments and condos, and then people who rent mobile homes, like it's a completely different act of law. So I introduced a bill that basically harmonized those and said, you know, whether you live in an apartment or a townhome renting, or you live in a mobile home, the same laws and protections apply to those tenants. So we passed that bill this year. It's a good one. Let me see if there's other questions. Okay, somebody asks, how can we help nonviolent felons get back their rights to run for office or own a gun? That's a great question. I am going to sponsor next year, I think, unless someone else wants to do it, but I want to make sure this gets introduced. A bill to say that any formerly incarcerated person who has a felony conviction is eligible to run for office. I think that Nebraska and society as a whole would be better if we had the experience of people who had experienced incarceration in our legal system, in our government, because also that would give representation to people who have been incarcerated or are incarcerated as well. I also support enfranchisement for incarcerated people. In Nebraska, we have a 2-year waiting period after somebody has gone through all of their probation, post-release supervision, served all their time. After someone's out, they have to wait 2 years to be able to vote. Senator Wayne introduced a bill to say, nope, as soon as you're out, you should get to vote. I fully support that. And I also support allowing incarcerated people to vote, but the chances of that happening in Nebraska right now, I don't think it's there. Somebody asks, how are you going to pursue conversion therapy? Conversion therapy, which we hate to even call it therapy, is the completely debunked belief that through therapy, you can change somebody's sexual orientation or gender identity. This is prevalent more among very conservative religious groups. That's where you'll typically see this is, a kid comes out, a kid tells their parent or their faith leader, their pastor, that they're gay or that they're having, conflicted feelings about their sexuality. I think I might be gay, that kind of thing. And then that kid is given therapy or sent to a camp, like Pray the Gay Away, if you've ever heard of that. There was a film that came out a few years ago called Boy Erased. And that's a movie, like Nicole Kidman's in it, and a star-studded cast about the experience of conversion therapy. And these experiences are real, and conversion therapy does happen in Nebraska. There are camps in Nebraska where gay kids are sent. And I've heard testimony from people in Nebraska who have experienced conversion therapy who received electrical shocks while being shown homosexual pornography, for example. So the point of that treatment is to have people associate homosexual imagery with pain. One person who testified on my bill, they received a shock so bad that they passed out and bit off part of their tongue. And, it's child abuse, honestly, is what it is. And so I've introduced a bill now for the 3rd year going to ban conversion therapy for children, for minors in Nebraska. It has not gotten out of the Judiciary Committee. Over the interim, a good thing for some of you to do who want this practice to stop would be to contact the Judiciary Committee members and say, let's vote this out. Let's take a stand and tell children in Nebraska that they're born perfect just the way they are, that they don't need to be fixed or cured, and that we're not going to validate the quackery of licensed professionals in Nebraska who purport to offer this therapy. Nobody in Nebraska who holds a license as a medical professional should be practicing conversion therapy and keep their license. My bill has an exception for faith leaders, for ordained ministers. And that's because of First Amendment issues. We kind of can't say you can't tell kids that you can't tell someone that they can't tell kids they're going to hell, basically. You can't say, well, you're not allowed to say that to a child. that's like a First Amendment problem. But what my bill does is it just says if you hold a credential as a healthcare professional, you cannot practice conversion therapy, and it's not legal for children, for minors. I had another thought on that. What was it? I don't remember, but yeah, that's something we'll continue to pursue. Oh, I know what it was. The United Kingdom recently banned conversion therapy, and the Queen spoke against it. You know who else has banned conversion therapy? Utah. And they actually have like a very exhaustive law. It's like more, it goes farther than my bill does in Nebraska. And that bill is supported by the Mormon Church. So there is conservative support for this idea. But there is kind of a hesitancy in the Nebraska legislature to touch gay stuff. Like they don't want to, anything dealing with homosexuality is going to be a lightning rod for controversy. And I think that's too bad. You know, I think that we need to break that stigma. We need to normalize fighting for the rights of everybody without having it be a big controversy all the time. So that's why I'll continue to pursue this law. Somebody said, what are you doing to lower veteran suicide in our state? I think we need to lower suicide for everybody in our state. And for veterans specifically, that's why I've supported bills that support veterans. For example, the one we passed this year that allows them to keep a higher percentage of their Social Security income. And I've always supported expanding healthcare for veterans, for expanding treatments for PTSD. I've opposed expanding laws that extend the amount of time that people can use fireworks and like the types of fireworks that people can buy, because we know that affects veterans so much, and veterans have asked us not to do this. I have not introduced any bills specifically around suicide prevention, but I think that a lot of the conditions that exist in society that make access to healthcare impossible, that make access to affordable housing so difficult, that takes the people who have served our country and tells them that there's nothing we can do for them. This is legislation that I've always supported and will continue to support in the future. Someone else says they're worried about LR 14, which is a resolution to have a constitutional convention. They say, do you think this will be pulled from committee successfully? Excuse me. So LR 14 was introduced by Senator Halloran, and this is another one that like comes up year after year. And it's a resolution to sign on Nebraska in support of a convention of states, a constitutional convention. And if there was a constitutional convention, what that would basically be is a whole bunch of representatives from all the states coming together to amend the Constitution. And that's something I just don't support, because even if the expressed purpose of the convention is narrow, for example, getting rid of term limits or putting a cap on the national debt or whatever priority people have, the idea of a constitutional convention, it doesn't mean that other things will be off limits. They could put things in the Constitution around voting rights. They could put things in the Constitution that affects people of color and civil rights. And so that's just not something I feel like opening up. I think that the way to amend the Constitution is, you know, through other means that we have, and people need to engage more in their elections. If folks are unhappy with what their elected officials are doing, which same, we gotta elect different people. Why aren't different people being elected? Well, there's campaign finance issues. It's very, very hard to run for office. You know, you come under a lot of personal scrutiny, and you get a lot of negative feedback, and it's very expensive, and then you don't make any money when you're elected. So the solution, honestly, is just going to be, we need to have more people, different people, a representative group of people running for office. So if this is you, if you're interested in running for office, I would love to hear from you, and you can talk to me about it. And I can tell you everything I know, just from running, you know, my little district race for the legislature. But yeah, I think people who have problems that they want to change through a constitutional convention, those really just offer opportunities to get more involved with the candidates who are going to be going to Congress. Let's see. Oh, and about whether or not that will get pulled from committee. So Senator Halloran filed a pull motion, which means it didn't get out of committee, but if 25 people on the floor support bringing it to the floor for full debate, then we can do that. We were able to block that. And then Senator Mike Flood filed a motion to suspend the rules so we can like temporarily change the rules and allow that bill to come back. We were supposed to debate that yesterday, but so many supporters of the motion were gone, were checked out already, they had left, that the speaker decided not to get to it. So we're going to take that up next week, I think. And, you know, it must be nice when you don't have enough support for your bill, so the speaker says, okay, we just won't get to it. We'll just reschedule it when everybody's here. Must be nice. Let's see what else is here. Well, I have gone through pretty much all the stuff I wanted to talk about. This is one way to talk to me. It is certainly not the only way to talk to me. I want to thank all of you for your wonderful questions, for your engagement, whether it's here right now in this meeting or whether it's on social media, especially throughout the session. I pride myself on being very accessible. We'll have another one of these webinar virtual Zoom things in 2 to 4 weeks, and we'll keep having them ongoing over the interim. I won't always have a lot to say because we won't be in session, so I won't really have like news necessarily, but it's important to me to hear from you. In addition, I am fully vaxxed. I'm good to go. I'm still wearing masks inside because, of course, my daughter, who's 11, is not vaccinated, so I want to be very careful still about potentially getting her sick. But I'm also looking at having some nice outdoor events over the summer where we can actually see each other in person and talk, and not just do the virtual thing that so many of us are so tired of. So look out for the next town hall. Look out for some in-person outdoor events. And other than that, I'm around, right? Like I just got this dog. You want to see my dog? I just got her like 2 days ago. Isn't she cute? This is Cricket. And she's half French Bulldog, half Pomeranian. And I got her from a local rescue, and she's 2, and she's really good. Like she's really, really well trained. We don't have any accidents. We like to go on walks. We don't have a lot of barking. She's a really good girl. So anyway, now I have Cricket. And so all we do is go for walks. So you'll see me around Benson and Dundee. And if you see me, say hi, because I would love to visit with you anytime. Okay, so thanks everybody for participating.